Okay, so we kind of got cut off there. Once again, my video went a little long, so this is part two of our video on solving quadratics. So at this point here, we were completing the square. What I was saying was that we needed to get the quadratic term and the constant term, sorry, the quadratic term and the linear term on the same side, move that constant term to the other side. So what that means is that this 3/2 needs to be subtracted on both sides so that we have x squared minus 4x equals negative 3/2. So just like we did on the previous problem, we want to take half of the b value. So half of this negative 4 would be negative 2. And then we square negative 2, and that gives us a 4. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. When I complete the square, this gives me that perfect square trinomial. It can be factored into the same binomial squared. So that left side becomes x minus 2 quantity squared. Here I've got negative 3/2 plus 4, but what I'm going to do is change it to have a common denominator, and so that means I'm going to be adding 8 halves to negative 3/2. And so that gives me a positive 5 over 2. At this point, I'm ready to take the square root of both sides. And so what I have is x minus 2 equals plus or minus, and I can't really simplify the square root of 5/2, and so I'm going to just leave it in that form, plus or minus the square root of 5 over 2. You could go ahead and rationalize the denominator. We won't worry about that for right now. So then our last step, solving for x, we're going to add 2 to both sides. And so our two solutions are that x equals 2 plus the square root of 5/2 and 2 minus the square root of 5/2. So anytime you are solving a quadratic, you should get two solutions. In these cases, we have two real solutions. It's possible we could have two imaginary solutions. It's also possible that our solution could be a double root. Most of these problems will not give us something like that. It's going to give us our two solutions, either two real or two imaginary. So just some steps to think about when you're trying to solve a quadratic. What are things to look for? So first thing is ask yourself, can I isolate the variable alone on one side of the equation? If that's the case where you've got just the variable, it's going to be a quadratic term on one side and you have a constant term on the other, that's when you want to use the square root method. If the isolation doesn't work, then you want to get everything on one side of the equation and set it equal to 0. By doing so, you're going to be able to factor, either by taking out a greatest common factor or using one of our other methods. And if factoring doesn't work either, if the problem can't be factored, and some quadratics cannot, then that's where we want to complete the square. You could also use a quadratic formula, but for right now we are going to focus on that idea of completing the square. Always a good idea to check your answers. If you use your graphing calculator and plug in the original equation into y equals and check it that way, you can do so. We'll talk about that during class. And there's your assignment.